The Lord of the Rings is something special to me. I read the books when I was young, and they are, in my opinion, the best fantasy novels of the century. Then I fell in love with the movies, and Peter Jackson's epic adaptation, which stands as the best fantasy film trilogy of the century. The world of Middle-earth, created by J.R.R. Tolkien, hit upon something deep in my being, and that's something important to keep in mind, because I'm about to talk about Amazon's adaptation, The Rings of Power. This will not go well. J.R.R. Tolkien is considered one of the godfathers of modern fantasy. Even if you've never heard of him, you've likely seen or read something that bears his influence. His conception of fantasy races like elves and dwarves have become archetypes that are still used today. The idea that elves are tall, fair-skinned immortals with ties to nature and magic? Yep, that came from Tolkien. Working alone, he created an entire world of races, cultures, and languages, but it's the story and the characters that inhabit that world that make it so appealing to so many. The essential battle between good and evil, which isn't just a philosophical struggle between two opposing groups, like the light and dark sides of the Force. In Lord of the Rings, it is a literal war between the armies of the Dark Lord who seek to subjugate and rule all life, and the people who have the courage to resist him. But it's more than that. It's also about the battle each character fights with themselves, over their own darkness, the impulses to run away, to submit, or to seek power for themselves. See, the Dark Lord doesn't just rule through might, but through the seducing desire for power. Tolkien personifies this temptation through the form of seemingly benign objects, like a little golden ring or a stone, small objects that belie the power and danger they represent. Then we have the large cast of characters that have remained ingrained in people's hearts and imaginations for decades. Gandalf, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, Frodo, Sam, Merry, Pippin, Arwen, Éowyn, Galadriel, and Saruman. If you are at all a fan of Lord of the Rings, just speaking those names is enough to draw out images of them in your mind. Moments from the story, lines of dialogue, and all the emotions attached to them. This is the power of Tolkien's work, his novels, and the film adaptations that are just about as perfect as we possibly could get. We love the depth, genuineness, and relatability of these characters. We revel in their adventurous journey, captivated as they fight to defend not only Middle-earth, but each other, and the ultimate quest to destroy evil. I've taken the time to talk about all this because it's important to understand where Lord of the Rings fans are coming from when we approach Rings of Power, because Amazon's show does not carry any of the identifying traits of Tolkien's work, replaced instead with current-day allegories, intersectional feminism, diversity, and shipping. But I've put this off for too long, so here we go. Here's the recap of Season 1 of Rings of Power. The season opens on a flashback, showing a child Galadriel sending a little paper boat she made down a river. Some bullies decide for no apparent reason to throw rocks at it until they sink it. A devastated Galadriel starts to break down before her big brother shows up to chase off the bullies. And then he has a little sit down with Galadriel where he tries to cheer her up with the most insipid dialogue I have ever had the displeasure of listening to.
Do you know why a ship floats and a stone cannot? The stone sees only downward, but the ship has a secret. For unlike the stone, her gaze is not downward but up, fixed upon the light that guides her.
Now never mind, that makes no friggin' sense. It also doesn't address the fact that a stone just sank Galadriel's boat. But this show is as high as its writers were when they wrote this crap, and the analogy comforts little Galadriel. And then we jump to current day, sometime in the Second Age of Middle-earth, almost 5,000 years before the events of Fellowship of the Ring. Galadriel is leading a band of warriors in what has been a centuries-long hunt for Sauron, because he's gone missing. And while some of the elven leaders think the Dark Lord is gone for good, Galadriel is sure he's still out there somewhere. So she's continued to drive her ragged band from one end of Middle-earth to the other, with no idea where they're going or what exactly they're looking for, just hoping to stumble upon Sauron by chance, I guess. But the other soldiers who have had enough of following their aimless leader stage a little mutiny. With all her men abandoning her to return home, Galadriel decides to put a pause on her hunt, and returns home with them to harass King Gil-galad for more resources to continue her quest. Unfortunately for her, Gil-galad has grown tired of Galadriel's antics as well. He instead strips her of her command and orders her onto a boat bound for Valinor, the elven homeland.
That our days of war are over.
Oh, and there's something about the light of Valinor dying in the elves, which will cause all the elves to die. It's also causing a blight on the land, but that's not important, because after the first couple of episodes, it stops being a thing. Anyway, Gil-galad and Elrond think that Mithril is the answer to the problem. See, it's all shiny because it has the light of Valinor in it as well. Because lightning struck a tree once, and the lightning went down the tree into a mountain and created Mithril. So somehow the elves get this idea that if they get a bunch of Mithril and shine it on themselves, the light will be rekindled inside them and save them. No, it doesn't make any sense, but this is the plan. And Gil-galad doesn't want Galadriel messing it up by going off and hunting Sauron. Essentially, he's sending her off into retirement to get her out of his hair. After a little petulance, Galadriel relents. She obeys the king and gets on the boat. But after traveling across the expanse of the sea, when the boat is at the threshold of Valinor, Galadriel decides her job isn't done after all. She isn't ready to give up and dives off the boat and starts swimming back across the ocean. Lucky for her, she runs into a raft of random people who rescue her. But after a creature attack and a storm, most of the people die, leaving Galadriel and a guy named Halbrand. And after they take turns saving each other, they are bonded on a deep personal level or something. Anyway, they drift on what's left of their raft with no water and no food, and another stroke of amazing luck, in the vast emptiness of the ocean, they just happen to run into a ship. The ship picks them up and takes them to the island nation of Numenor. Now in Tolkien, the Numenorians were a race of big, powerful warriors who fell due to hubris and corruption. In Rings of Power, though, it's a nation of young, effeminate boys with no idea how to fight, and who wear chest plates with built-in boob accents. And they're led by a female regent who has taken over for a weak, sickly king. Here is where the first season spends an inordinate amount of time dithering with plot contrivances. Galadriel butts heads with Regent Miriel when she pretends she's still the leader of the Norman armies,
Commander of the northern armies of High King Gil-galad.
which she isn't because remember Gil-galad relieved her of duty, but she demands that Miriel give her the Númenórean army that she can take with her back to Middle-earth and continue to hunt for Sauron. There's some current day isms thrown in too. Protests break out when some of the working people see Galadriel and think she heralds the influx of elven immigrants who are going to take their jobs. Yeah. Immigration allegories in Lord of the Rings. And also Galadriel becomes obsessed with Halbrand, because she believes he's some lost heir to the throne of Middle-earth. Although Halbrand swears he's not, that he isn't a hero, and he only wants to settle down on the island and become a blacksmith. But Galadriel continues to hound him until he agrees to go with her. Which turns out to be a bad thing, because in the worst plot twist of the last couple of decades, it turns out that Halbrand isn't some lost king, but the Dark Lord Sauron in disguise. Galadriel figures this out, but only after bringing him into the fold and introducing him to the elven smith Celebrimbor. Those two hit it off as they set about how to craft mithril into rings, which ties back into the plot about curing the elves from the whole light dying thing. After confronting Halbrand Sauron, he runs off, and Galadriel decides not to tell anyone about this. She advises that they instead go forward with making the elvish rings, even though she knows that making them is part of Sauron's plan. This means that it's Galadriel who enabled and empowered the return and rise of Sauron. In other storylines, there are orcs who are roaming the Southlands under the command of Adar, a corrupt elf who thinks he killed Sauron, and is out to make a homeland for the orcs. But that causes all kinds of trouble for the people in their path, including a human named Bronwyn and an elf called Arendir, who are in a forced, mindless Romeo and Juliet romance with no chemistry at all, and honestly it goes nowhere. But the orc subplot does, through a set of story points too detached and stupid to follow. Adar has his orcs dig a trench, from a giant dam to an inactive volcano. Then he has a human take an evil sword hilt made by Sauron to a dam which was built by the elves. The evil sword hilt made by Sauron fits into a lock mechanism in the dam built by the elves, which opens up the spillways on the dam. That means water runs down into the trench dug by the orcs and into the volcano, which wakes it up, and the ensuing eruption lays waste to everything in the Southlands. Except all of our main characters who are caught in the eruption, but they're all just fine. The Southlands, however, are scorched to a cinder, and creates the Land of Mordor. Yes, Rings of Power just gave us an origin story for Mordor. Lastly, and I hesitate to even mention this because of how useless it is to the overall season, but there is another subplot focused on a group of halflings called Harfoots, who are supposed to be the ancestors of the hobbits, and they're totally different. Hobbits largely stay in one place. They stay close to home. The Harfoots are nomads who wander from place to place. The hobbits are a large community who mostly get along and look out for each other. The Harfoots are heartless little bastards who abandon their own when they can't keep up with the caravan.
Take their wheels and leave them.
But anyway, the whole deal with them is that some big human guy falls out of the sky like a comet. This guy can't speak and doesn't seem to know who he is, but he does possess some kind of magic. Mystery Wizard Guy befriends a girl named Nori, who's basically a gender-flipped Frodo, along with her friend Poppy, who is a gender-flipped Sam. Nori decides to defend the Mystery Wizard Guy from the others in her group, until he decides to go off on his own. Then she decides to leave her family and go with him because she feels like it's her destiny or something. There is another subplot about Elrond talking to the dwarves hoping to get their mithril, but that's a lot of nothing. Some other things happen. At one point, the elf dude Andir is captured and put into a chain gang digging that trench, which is an allegory for exactly what you think it is. Galadriel is an unlikable bully who fights with just about everyone. She throws her weight around and is certain she's always right and everyone else is always wrong. She uses her own self-righteousness as an excuse to trample anyone who stands between herself and her goal. Her drive for vengeance against Sauron and her unwillingness to listen to anyone frequently makes her seem more like a villain than a hero. One nice thing I can say about the show is that the special effects generally look good, and some of the sweeping fantasy cinematography is well done. A couple of the actors, like Robert Armario, who plays Elrond, does a decent job and does the best with the material he's given. But for the most part, the writing is bad, the acting is worse, and the action is boring. Far too little happens in the first 6 episodes, and far too much happens in the last 2. Much of it goes nowhere and makes no sense. And worst of all, it is a shell of what Tolkien created, intentionally hollowed out so it could be stuffed with progressive feminist propaganda and current-day allegories, all of it polluted with a bankrupt morality that tries to cast both sides in a murky gray space that ultimately has nothing to say. And that is my recap of Rings of Power Season 1, just before Season 2 drops. And yes, Season 2 will be worse. But as always, this is all just one rebel's opinion. What do you think? Did you watch Rings of Power? What did you think of it? Are you excited for Season 2? Let me know in the comments below. Like the video and subscribe to the channel so you'll get all the latest updates right here on Rebel Normal.